welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us this morning. It's going to be kind of a unique twist, I think, on typical security presentations. I'm curious, how many people here work in the gaming industry at all? Couple? Anyone? Couple, maybe? How about people that are gamers? Anyone? Yeah, there you go. So that's what I figured. That's what I figured I'd get. So I'm pretty excited to kind of share with you a bit of my journey and a bit of what we've learned and what we've seen in the gaming space and what we're kind of seeing from a new attack perspective out in the wild. So we have our wonderful standard RSA disclaimer here, so if anyone wants to read this, I hope you've done it already. Does anyone know what this picture's from or what this might look like? Anyone familiar with what these are? This is a Steam account profile. So this is clearly where my credibility comes from, where I've spent a ton of money in 13 years playing games. Steam is a big PC gaming product. Some of you have probably heard of it. Anyone familiar with WarcraftMovies.com? Back in the day, remember this? How long ago did you play WoW? It's okay to admit. Years. Yeah, this was my high school, basically. Much more stressful running a guild in WoW than running a company I've found in life. So it's been kind of interesting. When was this uploaded? Does it have time? I don't know. A gazillion years ago, I'm guessing. 2010, there you go, see? It's in there. So I studied, as you can see, a Bachelor of Games in Interactive Entertainment, multimedia, game design, computer engineering, audio design, all these kind of fun things you do in game design. It's a very broad experience set to learn. I'm from Australia. Some of you may have picked up on the mild accent. And we're obviously at a security conference, so who better to talk about security than a born convict, right? You know, I think that makes sense. But I actually started in the health space. So I studied at QUT, which is a large technology university in Australia, in Queensland. And then I actually went into biotech, helping find early markers for diabetes, of all things. So this camera is a pretty standard camera you can get in optometrists, and what they were actually looking for is new ways to diagnose diabetes that were not invasive, so instead of having to do blood pricks and things like that. And there was a theory that the nerves in the eye, and this goes somewhere I'm sure, this will make sense. There's a theory that the nerves in the back of the eye actually could help ascertain if you have diabetes or not. So I actually helped this group as part of the high performance division to build technology which let them map the nerves in the eye, which is a kind of hard problem. So this is at 500 times magnification, and the patient's conscious, and the eye moves a lot when you're at that kind of magnification. So it was quite interesting building a technique to do that. But this is actually my eye from, I don't know, a while back now, 15 years ago or something. But this is really kind of the cool thing. So on the left, you can see my eye where there's this clear whirl where all the nerves converge. And on the right, this is somebody that has diabetes, and there's no whirl converging. And you can see this 2 years earlier than traditional methods pick up diabetes. So they actually then did a 10-year clinical trial period to vet it out, but they're now actually using this technique over in Europe to help diagnose people, which is really cool. But that's not how I got into game design or security. The next thing I did after that was we were an early partner for PC Connect or Windows Connect for Windows. Anyone remember the Connect? This hand wavy thing, so you can detect stuff. It was really cool. So the camera in that is the same as the one in your iPhone now. The iPhone's got a miniaturized version of that same technology, and that's what does Face ID. But it actually spits out a bunch of infrared dots, and it gets reflection, and from that it can figure out a kind of a 3D space. And I was actually awarded a scholarship from a large not-for-profit in Australia called the Endeavour Foundation to build technology for people with intellectual disabilities, something interactive and engaging. And I came up with this idea. This picture here, apparently it's me, but it doesn't really look like me anymore. It wasn't that long ago, I swear. But I basically came up with this technology where there's this interactive floor. We use a Kinect at the front and a short throw projector. And you can walk around, and it's like a giant iPad, basically. And we built this technology, and we licensed it to an early education kind of company in APAC. And they still sell those systems out in the wild. Then the next thing I did was I started a security company called Arcos. Why not, right? So I have a lot of background in computer vision software, and we use these techniques to stop bots accessing the internet, so fake accounts, credential stuffing, these kind of things. So we have a lot of amazing companies we work with, but the reason why I'm talking about gaming is obviously I'm a huge gamer. I love the gaming space. I got into programming because of things like video games. Our first customer was actually here in San Francisco. I flew over like, I don't know, 7 years ago, 8 years ago, and we met a gentleman called Bing Gordon. I'm sure some of you may be familiar with Bing Gordon. He's one of the founders of Electronic Arts, who were actually our first customer at Arcos. So for a very long time, we've been working with a large number of video game merchants, protecting their platforms and kind of learning about what's going on. This is a picture of me at their headquarters. They have like anyone play Dragon Age? Heard of Dragon Age? Yeah, they have like this giant Dragon Age throne. So I was like, hey, I should get a photo. That was a while ago too. And now we work with a bunch of other amazing companies, a lot of which will be very relevant to kind of what we're talking about. So now we can finally start the session, now that you know who I am. So what is the metaverse? You know, I think it's something like this. It's kind of like, wow. Has anyone used VR here? Yeah, a bunch of people. Did it change your life? Was it mind-blowing? Did it look like this when you're in there, where you're like, wow? So mind-blowing? Was it kind of like this, where you're like, we're in like a dilapidated van and you're wearing it, so like, yeah, okay, and then there's like robots in there, and we actually did, we do these company town halls, and we actually did one recently, and we did VR as a theme. Anyone remember this? From like, what was this, 2015, I think it was. So this is the founder of Oculus, and he was in Time magazine. VR was going to change the world. I think we're still waiting, but it's on its way, I'm sure. This is, I think, more commonly attributed to kind of what VR is. There's obviously a new, effort to kind of figure out how can we use VR in the workspace. We did kind of a VR virtual town hall this year, so I had like people and we were wearing like VR headsets, and that was kind of interesting. That was kind of fun. I don't know if I could spend all day in a VR headset, but there's a more official term for the metaverse. We kind of typically associate it with augmented reality and virtual reality and these kind of things, but there's a very simple description, which is it's a connection of 3D virtual worlds which have people in them with social connections, and there's economic value in these kind of things going on. So it's like, what other things does that describe? Well, as we're probably all pretty aware, the concept of a metaverse, we've really been in those or have had those for many years in video games. Like really, the metaverse is what video games are if they're online and connected. The single player video game probably not so much fall into that category, but all the online MMOs, those kind of different games absolutely fit that term. And interestingly, from a security standpoint, they have the exact same kind of problems that will exist in a virtual world of work and whatever other places we're doing. So this is a good example of what's called player versus player. So you have a bunch of people getting together and killing each other. It's very violent. It's amazing. There's also social connections, logging in, talking to people. People have guilds, they have friends. Some people have more friends online than they have in real life, and that's great because you can just turn it off when you're done with them. You earn things in games, so there's an economic value. You've got a sense of progression. You kind of go on through life, kind of like what we do every day, I guess. You can go and literally sell things in these games. There's auction houses. Web3 actually has started having the real currency being used in the virtual world, quite a fair bit more nowadays. So all the way at the very beginning of time in 2003, I've put a title called Second Life. Anyone familiar with Second Life? Yes? There you go. Second Life, I think, is probably one of the earliest examples of what the metaverse really is. And this game is still going today, still going very strong. And it's got its own economy, it's got its own whole social platform. It doesn't really have an objective. It's more of a social You go and play with your friends and stuff online. There's a lot more others in here that have kind of objectives. So, I mentioned World of Warcraft in here, which I'm sure many of you have heard of. RuneScape, there's a ton of examples equivalent to that. There's some really interesting milestones along the way, like Microsoft acquiring Minecraft for $2.5 billion. That was back in 2014, right? So this concept of metaverse has been going and being noticed as how incredibly valuable it is for many years. Obviously, probably the biggest, most recent in history is Facebook renaming to Meta. No surprise. I would say that's probably on the nose in terms of why that's relevant. And then recently, Microsoft attempting to acquire Blizzard. We're seeing if that's happening or not in action. But there are obviously World of Warcraft and all the franchises Blizzard work on are fantastically valuable, and all these people that are connected and all this good stuff. And then let's talk about what's the opportunity. So the benefit in the metaverse is, people are willing to pay to play, to earn, buy digital goods. They're socializing. There's a lot of value in being social with people. Second Life in 2021 paid out about $80 million to creators. So these are people that are making content for their platform. There's been recently couple of hundred of partnerships with, I don't know if anyone's heard of Sandbox, which is kind of a Web3 kind of platform. And you have a Warner Media and a bunch of others where they're actually sponsoring places in the metaverse. And this stuff's also incredibly valuable for fraudsters, no surprise. So other people are trying to figure out how do we take advantage of this and this opportunity. So we're now going to kind of walk through and talk a little bit about what are the kind of threats that are in these kind of metaverse experiences, gaming, what are the kind of opportunities for criminals? I think first and foremost, it's worth noting that, and maybe some of you are aware of this, but the people attacking these platforms and all your companies, they're in this to make money. And if they're not making money, they're not doing it. So as these things have gotten more and more popular and more successful, no surprise, we're seeing more creative adversaries figuring out how do I scam people, how do I dupe people. There's really basic stuff where people are trying to convince others to take their virtual gold. It's like, send me your gold and I'll give you this item or whatever, and then they don't give you the item. So really basic kind of scams, all the way up to more sophisticated things like compromising accounts and stealing currency and reselling it to other people. But at the end of the day, it's all driven by profit and monetization opportunity, and it's a huge industry, as we know. So I kind of wanted to cover in the session today 6 different threats that are equally relevant to these kind of metaverse platforms as they are to these other kind of gaming companies that have had to figure out over the years how to combat these, how to figure out tools and techniques, and there's a lot of similarities, I would say. So it's kind of interesting. A lot of the old problems are kind of new again, and you'll see the themes throughout where it's like, hey, yeah, as a gamer, I remember that problem. It's like, oh, okay, so that's how they solve that. So let's go through and talk about a few examples. So this is a problem called real money trading. So real money trading is incredibly lucrative, and what attackers are doing is they're trying to get access to virtual gold to then sell it to other players who want to get ahead in the game. So on the right is an example of a store. It's a third-party store. It's not authorized by the game platform, where you can go and purchase gold for the game. And you've got SLA time windows when you're going to get it delivered. People have ratings. They've got, you can see 20,000 ratings, 5 stars. That's probably a pretty good seller to buy from. And really what people are doing is, the reason why they're buying gold is because they don't want to spend the time in-game earning it themselves, but they still want to have access to the best gear. They still want to have access to the best items and all these kind of things. So there's a whole kind of shadow economy built around this. Now, the problem is it drives behavior, and on the left you can see kind of ads. So these are like ads for people to go send them to these websites. So if you're playing the game, you might get a message. Anyone ever got a message in any of these games for a gold website? Yep, it happens. But the way that they actually earn the gold is what's quite interesting. So there's kind of typically two ways the people selling this gold earn it. One is they might use bots to automatically play the game to go farm gold, but more commonly nowadays is they're actually compromising legitimate player accounts, stealing their gold out of their accounts, transferring it to their own characters, and then selling it that way. So when you buy gold from these kind of platforms, you're actually financing people that are going out and stealing from other players. So that's why that's not good. There's been a number of really interesting ways of trying to combat this, where platforms are trying to figure out, okay, can we sell the game's currency? We're now seeing where people have multiple different kinds of currency. So there's like a currency you can earn in the game, and then there's a currency that you can only get by paying for, and that can get you more exclusive items. So if you're willing to spend money, which clearly you are if you're buying from a third party, you spend it within the game's official system and store versus encouraging people to go steal and compromise accounts, which is not good. You don't want that. Banking's kind of fascinating. So we all have bank accounts. We're all kind of used to what banking looks like in the real world. You go to a teller. I don't know how many people go to tellers anymore, but some people go to tellers apparently. You can go to an ATM. I also don't know how many people still go to ATMs. Online banking, I think, is more kind of the norm, I would say, nowadays. But there's been a bunch of experiments of putting the concept of a bank into the metaverse. So some of the stats I showed earlier, those dollar figures, that was from JP Morgan Chase. So they're actually doing experiments to figure out, hey, what would banking look like in the metaverse? To the point where they actually have a bank set up in the metaverse where you can actually go into there and talk to people, get customer service and these kind of things, which is kind of fascinating. Now, the problem with the metaverse is really anyone can, well, in this particular example, I believe it's a sandbox, anyone can create content. So there's an interesting problem with now having to police the content. So the bank can go in and say, yep, I'm JP Morgan or whatever bank I am. But what's to stop someone else from saying the same thing? So if you've got a scenario now where you're encouraging your customers as a bank to go into these virtual worlds and do things in there that might be like, hey, I've got a problem with my account, I can't log in, or trying to transfer money or whatever it may be. We're starting to encourage people to go into these virtual environments and trust the content in there is legitimate. So there's a really interesting problem that's going to occur, and we see it already with trademark goods and stuff like that. If you go onto these virtual stores where people can upload created content, you'll see things that may not be quite so legitimate. Like you might see like Disney characters, but not released by Disney, for example, because there's hundreds of thousands of items being created. So this is a really difficult content problem to kind of solve. That concept will also apply to things like this. What's going to stop someone creating a pseudo-looking bank that may not be the real thing, and then they use that to do phishing, right? So there's a new type of phishing, but you could theoretically create an experience that looks authentic enough that someone might be convinced to, unfortunately, get you can't really create a fake bank in the real world. I feel like that would be really quite difficult, but it's going to be a different problem in the virtual world. And that's kind of the reality of this concept of buying property and then being able to kind of populate it with your own things. Has anyone gone in and seen kind of content like this in any of these virtual worlds? Yeah. Yeah. What's an example of something?
My wife works for Sandbox.
Okay. Well, there you go.
No longer, but she.
Okay.
I've seen. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, it's a whole new brave world for us. Mm-hmm. Whole new brave world. So let's talk about another kind of, I think this is kind of hilarious actually. So it's hilarious, it's kind of social engineering. So in these games, there's these communities called guilds. They might be called different things in different games. They kind of like to brand it so it's associated with kind of the game's name. But basically it's a bunch of people getting together and you kind of play together, you go do raid bosses, you go do content together, you play the story together, these kind of things. But there's typically kind of a mechanism to kind of pool resources. So you have like a guild bank. So everyone can kind of share money with the guild so that the guild can afford to buy a guild house or something. So this guy, or girl, not sure which, he was a co-owner of this guild, and they had a bunch of money because they had a ton of players in the same guild. And he just decided one day, hey, I'm going to take everything out of the guild bank and transfer server and rename my character. And that's basically what he did. So he transferred everything he could out of the guild bank, which is a huge amount of currency. It was pooled by hundreds of players. And then yeah, basically just jumped ship, went to a different server. They couldn't do anything about it because it was legitimate, because he was a co-owner of the guild. And there's not a lot you can do about that. But from his perspective, I didn't steal anything. I was authorized to own the content. It's a little bit malicious. Who thinks this is acceptable behavior? Anyone? No one. I should have done the opposite, which was, I digress. But this is a good example of kind of a social engineering kind of problem, right? That currency is worth money, right? You can sell that currency. It's valuable. It's not like this isn't valuable. So these players are actually all working together, but there's a lot of value in that kind of currency. And again, these are the kind of things you need to think about in these kind of virtual worlds. Like it's not the same as, you go to your company's bank account and transfer the funds out and then, move to Canada or something. The Canadians would not go for that, I'm sure. But these are the kind of problems that companies have had to figure out how to kind of solve for. Has anyone heard of Ni no Kuni Crossworlds? No? This is a mobile game that came out recently. It had a really fascinating experiment in it. So obviously the mobile gaming ecosystem is hugely popular, very profitable games. And something that they experimented with in this game is the concept of cryptocurrency as an in-game asset you can earn. So it's called play to earn is this concept. It's kind of a Web3 concept where you can earn by fighting other players and ranking a currency that can be transferred back into cash through the crypto platform. It was kind of complicated. I played it for a few weeks just to kind of figure out how it went. But you earn this thing called Terite. Then you had to transfer that into an app, a wallet called Terite Token. So it was a cryptocurrency. And then from there, you could transfer it to a different kind of crypto token called Marblex. And from that, you could transfer it into Bitcoin or cash out of the system. So the objective here was they wanted to create kind of an ecosystem where if you play the game, you could earn money, and other players would buy this currency from you so they could buy gear and gold. So they're kind of moving away from this virtual gold concept, but it is still virtual currency. And anyone could earn this in-game. So the kind of interesting thing here, what happened is people were like, well, if there's an economy that I can go play this game and then sell this currency for, in a lot of countries, it's actually a pretty lucrative kind of thing to do, just play the game all day, and then I can go sell it. I remember at the very beginning, you could play a few hours a day and you could earn $30, $40 a week or something. It doesn't sound like that much money per account. But this game, because it's a mobile game, was also very friendly to like autoplay. So the concept of mobile games is typically you're not playing them, they're not like console games. So they're pretty easy to play, right? There's like a button you can click and it'll automatically go play for you, basically. So of course, what people figured out how to do was create bots. Lots and lots and lots of bots that would go and play this game and earn this currency. So it's like $30 per account times hundreds of thousands of accounts, right? And that was kind of interesting as a legitimate player to kind of see like all these random character names just kind of running after each other in the game. You kind of see like these trains of bots running around. And the other problem that would happen is you couldn't log into the damn game because the servers were full of bots playing the game. So that wasn't great from a user experience. The other interesting problem was this currency, it tanked in value because it was linked to a real world value. So as more of it was created, it became worth less and less and less. And the in-game items didn't change in price, or at least they didn't in the first month or so. I don't know if they changed that later. But that created some interesting problems where it was actually incredibly cheap to buy things that you shouldn't really have access to. And it kind of messed the economy up quite a lot. So I don't think they were fully expecting what happened to unfold, but fraudsters are always trying to figure out how do I make money as best as I can. I don't know if it's it's hard to call this fraud directly. I mean, it's a bunch of people playing a game that's really easy to play, but that's another kind of fascinating problem to think about. If you're creating a currency that you can earn in a virtual world, you got to think about the implications. Obviously, in the real world, it's kind of harder to do this at scale, although, well, I guess fraudsters do it. But yeah, so it's a good example of what you have to kind of start thinking about with these more complicated systems. Anyone familiar with the word griefing? Yep, what's griefing?
Generally kind of causing problems for other players, either abusing the system in some way basically to be a big pain.
Yeah, so you log in to this game that you want to play and someone just comes and kills you. And then when you get revived, they come and kill you again. And then you get revived and they come and kill you again. And you're like, this kind of sucks. That's kind of the high-level concept of what griefing is. It's this idea of someone just griefing you, I guess. I don't know. Is griefing really a word used outside of gaming? I'm not sure. I guess it probably is. So these companies have had to figure out all these different ways of preventing this kind of behavior from occurring. So nowadays you can normally opt into, can someone kill me or not in the game because of these kind of things. So there's a ton of examples of this. On the top right you can see a game where basically you can say, do I want to be available for people to attack me? So if someone is trying to grief you, you can just turn off that feature, then they can't do anything. So they've started building these different kind of concepts into games. In the virtual world, so kind of like in VR, griefing is still a problem, but it's more problematic because it's people doing it to you. And like it's, someone walking up to you and maybe being inappropriate or whatever it may be. So this is a very different and much more personal kind of problem to think about that you don't typically have to worry about. Well, maybe in the real world you do sometimes. People get very close sometimes. But this is a game that I think has done a fantastic job. Well, it's VR chat, where you can kind of go in and choose if people get too close to me, they disappear. They can't actually walk up to me anymore. So you can actually pick, like, what's my radius before someone come up to me. And these kind of different things that you wouldn't really typically think about as a problem you have to kind of solve for, right? But like in a virtual world, there's all these different kind of schemes and scams and different kind of security, very different kind of security problems. It's kind of like security problems, like a physical security problem, but in the virtual world. And the next thing I want to talk about is cheating in VR, right? Not that kind of cheating though. Different kind of cheating. So as you all would probably be familiar, if any of you are engineers or programmers, the reality of connecting to something digital is there's a bunch of information being sent from a device you have, or a computer or a phone, to a server that's interpreting that information and then figure out what to do with it. There's a lot of examples of cheating. So cheating is effectively where, there's a few different versions of what cheating may mean, but typically cheating is where people are abusing the code to get unfair advantages. So this is a first-person shooter where they can actually see other players behind walls and stuff, which they shouldn't be able to do that, right? So they've actually hacked the game to make it expose data that they shouldn't have access to. And that obviously gives them a massive advantage in the game because no one else can see that. There's another example of the same thing where they get like a wireframe view. So instead of even seeing the game how normal players see it, they have a completely different view that they've customized where they can actually peer through walls. This is a very complicated problem, and it's very much a whack-a-mole kind of problem. So we're all in security, we know what that's like. As the game developers build in kind of anti-cheat technology, people figure out new ways to get around it. The reason they do that is because cheating is actually an incredibly lucrative industry. So the people creating the cheats aren't the ones using them. They're actually selling them to other people that want to go and cheat in these games, get ahead of them, these kind of things. So it's very lucrative for the computer engineers, I suppose, that are building these cheat kits. And the more popular games have these really kind of sophisticated cheat engines. And the bottom left is an example of kind of a more simple cheat, but this is a game called Final Fantasy XIV. I don't know if anyone heard about this drama recently, but there was a new raid boss that came out, and the first guild that killed it could actually pan their camera really far out, like way further out. You should be able to see it. So you can like see this whole circle. You're only meant to be able to see like a sliver of that. So they actually could see way more content, which let them obviously have a much higher chance of defeating the boss because they could see what was going on better than any other people playing the game. So these are kind of examples of cheats and problems. And at the left is an example of what it kind of looks like to the cheater. You get this tool that you can click buttons and it's aimbot, so your aim is much better, and these kind of things. And then on the top right is a thing called Cheat Engine, which lets you edit memory. So you can go in and search for values like, okay, I got 20 potions. You can go in there and search 20, and then you drink a potion. I got 19 potions, search for 19 potions. You can keep searching until you basically find the right memory code for the potions, and then you can set it to whatever number you want. So you can go and actually edit the memory in real time. That works more for single player kind of games. For online games, they store that data on the server, which prevents it from being manipulated. You can't edit server-side information. So you've got to be very thoughtful when you're building these kind of platforms that you do not rely on the client data, because everything client-side can be spoofed, and if it can be spoofed, well, unfortunately, adversaries can get it. The reason why these kind of wall cheats work is because the game is downloading to your computer the position of other players so that they can be rendered in the game. But unfortunately, that also gives that data to the client, so an attacker can figure out in the memory, okay, let's put that information back in the game. So they're very creative and very, they're very good at what they do, but it's kind of a different ecosystem problem to kind of deal with. And we've been talking about things like account compromise. So account compromise is where people go in and steal your accounts. They figure out your login credentials. This problem exists in all of your industries. So if you're in banking, travel, in banking, they're trying to compromise an account to steal the currency in it. If you're in travel, it's typically things like loyalty point fraud. If you're a video game merchant, it's real money trading, as we've been talking about. Credential stuffing has a number of techniques to get in. So one is, account takeover has multiple techniques to get in. One is credential stuffing or password spray. So this is where they're just testing with bots automatically different combinations of login, usernames, passwords to find a valid pair and then get into the account. Anyone reuse passwords here? Anyone doesn't reuse passwords here? That's more accurate. I don't know, is that true? Is it true? How's it doing an audit later? Unfortunately, everyone reuses passwords. Everyone. Even all the people that know they shouldn't reuse passwords, they're reusing them on low value assets at a minimum. But this is a big issue that we're still kind of dealing with many years later. Phishing obviously is where they're trying to convince you to give you their information. There's even new kinds of phishing where it can get around multi-factor nowadays, where basically the phishing site, when you type in username and password into the fake site that you're not meant to be putting it into, they actually send that data in real time to the real login server. So if you're on a fake bank account's phishing page, they're actually going to send it to the real server, and then that'll trigger multi-factor back to your phone, and then you type it into the phishing site, and then the phishing site sends it to the real bank and gives them the login cookie. So there's like new ways where they're even innovating on how you do basic things like phishing nowadays to get around multi-factor and stuff. Vishing is voice phishing. SIM-swap, it's actually not too complicated to figure out things like where does a person live. There's a website called usphonebook.com. If you want to be creeped out, go there and put your name in and see how much information they know about you. It'll tell you things like what's your phone number, who are known relatives and associates, where do you live, how old are you. Basically all the kind of data you need to convince somebody else that you're them, and you can answer security questions and these kind of things. Criminals use this data all the time, unfortunately. One thing they may use it for is going to a telco and trying to convince the telco, hey, I've just ported my phone to a new number, transfer the SIM, and then they get access to your multi-factor and that kind of stuff. And then email compromise. So getting into your actual email account is incredibly problematic, because if you're in there, then you've got access to pretty much everything. That's kind of game over at that point. So in gaming, which of course we're talking about here, and gaming kind of covers both traditional gaming. It also kind of covers the metaverse world, because it's got a lot of similarities, because again, it's virtual, right? So kind of similar kind of problems. The common techniques in gaming is credential stuffing, because most gamers do not enable things like multi-factor. So credential stuffing is actually really effective. And the other big one is, of course, phishing. So phishing is, in the context of gaming, they might go onto Discord and say, hey, if you put your username into this website, you'll earn a bunch of currency in-game for free. And that's the kind of phishing schemes and scams that people are doing. And they're targeting kids with these kind of scams, right? And then the kid puts their credential into this site thinking they're going to earn some in-game currency or a cool item or something, and their account gets compromised. As we've been discussing, the attackers want to steal the virtual goods to resell those, run cheats or hacks. You can actually resell accounts as well. So if your account gets banned, cheaters don't really care about their own account's progression. They care about cheating and griefing people. That's what they enjoy doing. So they're more than happy to buy an account. Even if it gets banned, they'll buy another account, and that's what they like to do. And then, of course, the rewards from an adversary perspective, digital goods are actually very valuable. The other interesting thing is a username is also very valuable. If you have a really short username, like a three-letter username in a really popular game like Roblox, that's actually worth a lot of money because you can't get them anymore. Like, there's so many people playing these games. So even like the account's username itself is valuable. I've seen an account sell for $2,000 to $3,000 just because it has a unique username someone wants, right? So that's a good example of kind of the profit opportunity for criminals. This is an example of kind of the credential stuffing math where, maybe on average, an account might have about $10 worth of value in it if I can steal its currency and transfer it out. Some accounts have nothing in them, some have more in them, but on average, it's about $10. If you're doing credential stuffing where you're using a list of accounts from previously known breached websites, people reuse passwords, so if their username and password has been breached somewhere else, unfortunately that's now out there in the wild for the attackers to use. 1% is actually kind of high. It might be a bit less than that. If you see an increase in failed login attempts on your login logs, you're under attack from a credential stuffing attempt. So it's a really clean way to measure credential stuffing. And then, of course, for an adversary, they've got a bunch of costs. So they need to make sure their costs are lower than the returns, right? So they've got to pay for compute, they've got to pay for IP addresses, they've got to spend the time to build the software to kind of compromise and get through. So these are the kind of math equations people are going through every day, and really what you want to think about is how do I kind of cost-proof my product or my auth service so that it's more expensive for them to get in than their profit margin. If you do that, they stop. So it's actually pretty simple. Anyone familiar with Discord? Yep. So Discord is a fantastic social tool. It's kind of like Slack for gaming. You can join these communities. A lot of attackers we've found use Discord, and it's really kind of interesting. This is an example of a platform that says it's for social media tools, but really they're using bots to get like fake follows and stuff like that, and they're teaching people how to kind of abuse those systems. One of the problems we've seen at Arcos in the last 12 months, I'd say, is an increase in what we call kind of cybercrime as a service, which is kind of like businesses set up to attack on your behalf, and you buy from them. So you no longer need to figure out how do I build these attacks. I can just go purchase from these services. And those services do real-time support through places like Telegram and stuff like that. But we've seen more recently them moving to more public communities like Twitter and Discord and that kind of stuff to discuss this stuff. So the access to information for people to figure out how to attack things has gotten much lower. It's much easier now to kind of go find out how to do this stuff. There's one community I'm in where they're talking about like how to steal shoes, like the sneaker bots kind of stuff, but then also how to pay taxes so it doesn't look like you're doing anything too dodgy. And they're actually just talking about this out in the wild. So it's pretty crazy, but it's good to kind of be aware of this kind of stuff. There's 270 people online when I took this screenshot, but there's a lot of different communities. Some have thousands of people, some have tens of thousands of people in them. And these are the kind of people that are figuring out how do I crack into these accounts and steal this currency and all this fun stuff. So, how do we want to think about dealing with this sort of stuff, right? No more pretty pictures. Now we get some cool text. I'm going to lie. It's going to be great. What's old is new, no surprise. So everything I've just walked you all through, these are problems the gaming industry has dealt with for basically 20 years, right? In the metaverse, where it's a 3D world, where you have social and economic connections, and you earn currency, and you go to work, and whatever it may be, they have the same basic problems that have been dealt with for many years. People from the gaming industry obviously are very uniquely knowledgeable on kind of how to protect and design these systems. If you're building content for these platforms, it's kind of an interesting situation where you don't really have the tools to police your content. You don't really have the ability to kind of go in and enforce it yourself. So you're really reliant on the developers of these platforms to police the content and protect the players and that kind of stuff. So I really kind of, I see a future where we're going to be basically seeing kind of a lot of the same things around, we were talking about banking, for example, earlier. Content moderation is going to become so critical for the integrity of these platforms to take off. If you don't do content moderation incredibly well, you're not going to get the advertisers. You're not going to get the banks. You're not going to get these real-world opportunities into them. And of course, due to the online nature of systems, hackers can, go and edit and tweak, manipulate the code. You got to make sure your systems are designed in a way that doesn't expose sensitive data to the client. Assume that any information being sent to you could be spoofed or faked, so don't rely on anything coming from the client as well. Obviously, folks in the gaming space are very familiar with this. This concept's also true for apps as well, and websites. It's not really too dissimilar there, where information coming from a web browser can, of course, as we know, be faked. So don't just assume it's all going to be all secure just because it's sent from what looks to be good. Account protection, the same way we're protecting accounts today for banks and for travel platforms and these kind of things, same techniques they're using in the gaming space to protect their customers. Gaming has traditionally been kind of a pretty broad range of ages. You definitely have a much younger demographic also playing games, which also proposes new problems. So, for example, one of the largest games kids play, you don't need an email to sign up. You just put a username in and a password, and that's it. There's no phone, there's no email. So that's a really unique kind of thing to think about. How do you secure that? Because there's no recovery flow concept. So you got to kind of think about, okay, how do you protect that? Virtual currency, as an example with Ni no Kuni, criminals are very interested in figuring out how to make money, right? Or not even criminals. These are just people out there that are like, hey, this is a great opportunity. I'm going to write some software. It's going to go abuse the economy. I'm going to make a bunch of money. Currency design is incredibly tricky. And typically what I've seen from companies that do this well is they actually hire economic professors and stuff like that have like the whole theory of how this currency is going to work when kind of given to the hands of other people. And give the player security controls, I think, is super important. So as you've seen from like the VR concepts where people can kind of walk up to you and be abusive, you don't really want to have that. So these are kind of the problems you have to think from. It's like kind of bringing physical security concepts into a virtual world, which is kind of just a fascinating concept to me. I think that's just really unique. But unfortunately, there's people that aren't so great in this world, and you got to kind of deal with that and give people the right controls so that they feel safe. So we've seen tons of examples, kind of PvP modes, so you can turn off player versus player combat if you want, if you don't want to be involved in that, or the ability to kind of hide people if they're coming too close to you and these kind of things. So, yeah, there's a bunch of new information. I don't know how many people are kind of expecting this, but happy to take any questions if anyone has any. I don't know how we do questions at the mic, or they can just shout. Any questions? Yep.
I just had a few questions. If you had any thoughts about the security update for VR chat, if you weren't aware, they wanted to deal with hackers and a lot of like client-side mods and disabling that. And the way that they went about that was using Easy Anti-Cheat, which recently fairly acquired. And you had mentioned the importance of server-side code and having that handle it. Did you see this security update and deciding to go with the Easy Anti-Cheat as anything close to a sort of optimal response to it, or did it seem more like something to do quickly, dealing with the fact that they've already built up a lot of their server-side code on that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So Easy Anti-Cheat is designed to prevent things like the memory hacking and these kind of components. So obfuscate the code, obfuscate the memory, detect if someone's trying to manipulate the memory, so it runs on the device in an attempt, and they run typically pretty low level, like at the kernel level sometimes with these cheat software, so it's actually quite good at picking up stuff. Absolutely, like that's a lot of any of the online games that are serious have some component of anti-cheat built into them, which is client-side detection of tampering. But yeah, I mean, it's great that they've added that technology. It shows they're very serious about stopping the problems.
Thank you.
Any other questions? No? Well, awesome. Well, thank you all for coming today, and enjoy the final day of RSA.